Deep in Inner Mongolia stands a city built for 1 million people. Grand boulevards, an opera house, museums shaped like giant bronze beans, thousands of apartment towers marching to the horizon. For years, its population was closer to nobody. Streets swept clean for residents who never came, traffic lights cycling for cars that didn't exist. Ordos was the most famous of China's ghost cities, but it was never alone. Across China stand somewhere between 65 and 90 million empty homes. 90 million. Enough to house the entire populations of France and Germany, sitting dark. This wasn't an accident or madness. It was the output of the largest wealth machine ever constructed, real estate worth a quarter of the world's second-largest economy, running past its destination at full speed. And in 2021, the machine finally hit the wall. Today, the $50 trillion bet, and the bill that's now arriving. Today on the Money Atlas, why China built homes for nobody, how houses became the national savings account, and what happens when the biggest asset class on Earth deflates. Quick thing before we dig in. If you enjoy stories that make the world make sense, subscribing is the best way to see the next one, and it costs you nothing. All right, let's get into it. First, be fair to the machine, because it began as the most successful construction project in history. Since 1980, more than 700 million Chinese people have moved from farms to cities, the largest migration our species has ever attempted. Someone had to build the apartments, roads, metros, and sewers for a new Chicago's worth of people. Every few months, for 40 years, China's construction machine did it. Hundreds of millions of families moved from courtyard shacks into modern towers within one generation. When critics mocked the empty towers of 2010, Chinese planners had an answer that was often right. Build it first. They're coming. Ordos itself eventually found residents. The problem wasn't building ahead of demand. The problem was that the machine discovered could never be allowed to stop. Here's how the machine actually worked: 3 gears, perfectly interlocked. Gear 1, local governments. Chinese cities can't levy meaningful property taxes. Instead, they sell land to developers. At the peak, land sales funded roughly 40% of local government budgets. Schools, roads, salaries, paid by the next land auction. Gear 2, developers. They sold apartments years before building them, pre-sales, and used the deposits to buy more land, which funded more pre-sales. Gear 3, families. With banks paying little and stock markets distrusted, housing became China's savings account. Roughly 70% of household wealth poured into concrete. 3 gears, 1 requirement: prices must always rise. Everyone was betting on it. Which is precisely how a housing market becomes something else, a belief system. Feel the pre-sale system from a family's side, because it's the detail that makes everything human. In China's boom years, you didn't buy an apartment, you bought a promise. Pay the full price today, start the mortgage today, receive the keys in 2 or 3 years when the tower is finished. 9 out of 10 new homes sold this way. Now imagine watching the cranes stop on your tower while the monthly payments keep coming. A mortgage on a building that may never exist. In 2022, that imagination became a movement. Buyers across hundreds of stalled projects announced mortgage boycotts. We'll pay when you build. For a system whose one sacred rule is that Chinese households always repay, it was an earthquake. The confidence that powered the machine wasn't falling anymore. It was organizing. And beliefs overshoot. By the late 2010s, Chinese families weren't buying homes. They were buying claims on future price rises. Second apartments, third apartments, apartments in cities they'd never visited, empty by design because used homes resold for less. Whole towers sold out and stayed dark. An estimated 65 to 90 million vacant units nationwide. Developers, drunk on pre-sale cash, borrowed like empires. The largest of them, Evergrande, ran up more than $300 billion in liabilities, the most indebted property company in the history of the world. Every layer of the tower, the family, the developer, the city, was leveraged against the same single assumption. In August 2020, Beijing itself decided to test it. Alarmed by the leverage, Beijing drew 3 red lines, hard caps on developer borrowing. Cross them and no new loans. It was meant as discipline. It worked like a tourniquet on a body made of debt. Developers who lived on borrowed money to finish pre-sold homes suddenly couldn't borrow. Construction froze mid-tower across hundreds of cities. Buyers who'd paid deposits for unbuilt homes watched cranes stop, and new buyers, seeing that, stopped buying. Pre-sales collapsed, cutting off the developer's last oxygen. The flywheel that required perpetual motion experienced, for the first time in 30 years, a red light, and the biggest wheel broke first. Evergrande, builder of 1,000 projects, owner of a football club, seller of bottled water and electric car dreams, defaulted in late 2021 and was ordered into liquidation by a Hong Kong court in January 2024. $20 billion of shareholder value erased. $240 billion in claimed assets, entering a wind-up so tangled it may take a decade, because most of those assets sit in mainland legal limbo. Country Garden, once the biggest of them all, followed into default, with Sunac and dozens more. This wasn't a company failing. It was an entire business model, pre-sell, borrow, build, repeat, being declared extinct in real time. And the dominoes kept falling, which is how you know this was never one company's scandal. Country Garden, by sales, even bigger than Evergrande, the developer of the ordinary Chinese suburb, defaulted next. Sunac, Kaisa, Shimao, a who's who of the industry followed. Then the stress crawled into the shadows. Trust investment products sold to wealthy savers, backed by developer loans, began missing payments. A giant shadow bank, Zhangzhai, collapsed outright. Local government financing vehicles, stuffed with land-backed debt, wobbled behind them. When one firm dies, blame management. When an entire sector dies in formation, the business model itself was the corpse. Pre-sell, borrow, build, repeat, extinct. And now the deflation, the slow kind, the kind we studied in Japan. Chinese new home prices have fallen for 20 consecutive months and counting. A Shanghai apartment bought at the 2021 peak has lost roughly 40%. Total household wealth erased so far, an estimated $5 to $7 trillion, several Germanys of savings, evaporated from family balance sheets. Remember Gear 3, 70% of household wealth is in these homes. When your apartment is your pension, falling prices don't just hurt confidence. They cancel retirements, weddings, second children. Chinese consumers have responded exactly like Japanese consumers did in the 90s. They stopped spending. The ghost, it turns out, isn't in the empty cities. It's in the shopping malls. Don't forget Gear 1. Local governments that funded 40% of their budgets from land auctions have watched that revenue collapse. No developer is buying land to build homes nobody wants. The result is a quiet fiscal crisis across thousands of cities. Delayed civil service salaries, cut pensions, unfinished infrastructure, and mountains of hidden local debt coming due. This is the part of the story with no viral photos. You can't photograph a missing teacher's bonus the way you can an empty opera house. But it's where the ghost city's true cost lives. China's local state, the machine that built modern China, has lost its business model. And beneath the financial story runs a slower, harder current: demography. China's population began shrinking in 2022, the first sustained decline since the famine years, and its urbanization, the force that justified every tower, is approaching saturation. The math is brutal in its simplicity. 90 million empty homes in a country with fewer people every year, most already urban, whose young generation is smaller, marrying later, and, after watching their parents' guaranteed asset fall for years, deeply skeptical of concrete as destiny. Who, exactly, fills the ghost cities now? Bubbles can reflate when the underlying demand returns. This one's underlying demand is retiring. So why hasn't this produced a Lehman moment, a global financial explosion? Because China's system fails differently. The banks are state-owned. Beijing orders them to absorb losses slowly rather than dump assets. There are no securitized mortgage bombs in foreign hands, no overnight margin calls. The state controls the speed of the collapse, so instead of a crash, China gets a controlled deflation. But we've seen this movie. It's Japan, Episode 6. Asset prices fall, households repair balance sheets instead of spending, growth flatlines not for quarters but decades. China's nightmare isn't 2008. It's 1990 Tokyo, with 10 times the population and a fraction of the wealth per person. Beijing hasn't watched idly. It has thrown nearly everything at the floor. Mortgage rates cut, down payment minimums slashed, purchase restrictions lifted city by city, a program for state entities to buy unsold apartments and convert them to social housing, pressure on banks to finish stalled towers so boycotting families get keys. Each measure produces a flicker, then prices resume drifting down. Economists have an old phrase for this: pushing on a string. You can make credit cheaper, but you cannot make a family believe again, not after they've watched the unbreakable rule break. Japan's central bank, remember, discovered the same thing with 3 decades and negative interest rates. Confidence is the one input no government can print. The deepest lesson here isn't about China. It's about what happens anywhere housing stops being shelter and becomes the national savings account. Once 70% of family wealth sits in apartments, the government faces an impossible dial. Let prices rise and the young are locked out forever. Let them fall and the old are wiped out. Every option is a betrayal of someone. China built the most extreme version of this trap ever constructed, but softer versions of it exist in Canada, Australia, Korea. Everywhere the same sentence is spoken at dinner tables: real estate only goes up. 90 million empty apartments are what that sentence looks like, taken to its logical conclusion. The construction machine gave China the greatest urbanization in history, and then, because 3 interlocked gears demanded it, kept building past every red light into the largest property bubble ever recorded. The towers are still standing. The savings inside them are not. And the world's second largest economy is now running the experiment Japan never wanted to teach: how to deflate the biggest asset class on Earth, slowly. If this changed how you think about property, do 3 quick things. Tap like so more people find the video. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And turn on notifications, because next time we shrink from 90 million homes to a single molecule. One drug got so big it distorted an entire country's economy: GDP, currency, stock market, everything. Ozempic in Denmark. What happens when a nation rides one miracle? All the sources are in the description. This has been the Money Atlas. See you in the next one.